be recording this session, I think. Yes, so I am now currently recording this session. So please be aware that we are currently recording. And then at the end of my presentation, before we start the Q&A, I will stop recording. So with that said, oops, sorry, I have to get myself back to that first slide. Okay, and with that said, we'll go ahead and get started. So to touch a little bit on the logistics for the next 60 minutes, you'll see an agenda, and note that I'll present for about 40 minutes and then we'll conclude with about 10 or 15 minutes of questions and answers. First, I'll talk about what creativity is, how to apply and use these ideas within one's organization and everyday life. We'll look at examples of creative projects, how they came to fruition, and the impact that they've had on their communities. And along the way, I'll talk a little bit about getting buy-in, collaborating, and assessing that impact. And also, how do we learn and grow from failure and frustration? But first, I'd like to start us off with a flashback to 1995. The location is Champaign, Illinois, a small rural town in the Midwest where the corn and the soybeans grow as far as the eye can see. This is where I grew up. When I started my first library job at the Parkland College Library 25 years ago as a student worker who shelved books for roughly $3.25 an hour, librarians were information gatekeepers who spent most of their time sitting at the reference desk and working on weeding projects. Now we're connectors, collaborators, and storytellers, and we do it while budgets shrink and staff and resources dwindle. Facing these challenges means that libraries need to be flexible. We need creative staff who can communicate, think outside the box, and work effectively. Bringing creativity into libraries can seem daunting, but by defining what we mean by creativity, addressing some of the common obstacles, and looking at examples from library creativity in action, this presentation aims to open the doors to creative library practice to anyone who wants to reinvigorate their library and/or their own work. Now, let's get started and talk a little bit about creativity. Creativity is not a superpower, but it does involve thinking on multiple levels and making unusual connections between things that are not always related. When working creatively, seeing the big picture, having a plan, and goals are key. Also, it's important to understand that creativity is a lens. It's a way of thinking and not something that is solely associated with the arts. Although many individuals do not consider themselves creative or playful, it's like exercise or learning a new language. It may feel a little awkward at first, but with practice, it can feel good and inspire new ways of learning and understanding. Letting go and being creative is often considered fun, but it's also working hard, making critical judgments, and learning how things work and why. Ken Robinson, the author of Out of Our Mind, states, creativity draws on skill, knowledge, and control. It's not about letting go, it's actually about holding on. And creatives tend to be boundary crossers, inventors, and metaphor makers who reject the idea of either or and see multiple ways of blended solutions to any given problem. But perhaps most important, cultures of creativity and innovation must include diverse mindsets to provide all-inclusive solutions. There are many different ways to define creativity, and much of this really depends on the knowledge base each individual brings to the table. When looking up creativity in the dictionary, one mostly finds the word used as a noun and generally described as a state of being or a mindset, which is often tied to imagination or the arts. Again, Ken Robinson talks about creativity as applied imagination. In other words, putting your imagination to work. Basically, imagination is the idea and creativity is the action. Creativity is a process that involves generative and evaluative skills, which are fluid and regularly shifting. When being creative, one is pushing the boundaries of what we know to explore new possibilities. We draw on skills that we have, often stretching and evolving them as the work demands. Creativity often starts with brainstorming, doodling, or playing. And this is the point, is to do something and connect ideas in ways that have which not been thought of before. And these don't need to be original ideas, but perhaps original to the creator and or the organization. But it's also important to recognize that creativity will involve constraints, and most individuals and organizations will have ideas beyond what's possible. But until a person or an organization begins to flex their creative minds to what is possible versus what is not possible, it's hard to be innovative and try new ideas. Being creative takes work. It's a process about coming up with new ideas and applying them to the real world. It's about exploring, using one's imagination. And to do this, we must engage in lateral thinking versus vertical thinking. Vertical thinking is a more traditional way of thinking based on logic and convention. And lateral thinking is about solving problems in unusual ways and is often referred to as generative thinking or thinking outside the box. When thinking laterally, one will find themselves completely absorbed in the action and lost in the flow of work, which is also known as being in the zone. By working creatively and engaging with lateral thinking, we allow our brains to work in a different fashion, allowing our imagination to run wild as we look for patterns or unusual connections. When working creatively, speaking in metaphors, which is imagination's reality, will often become a very important aspect of this work. And relating by metaphor can help one better understand themselves and others, which can boost creativity, innovation, and understanding within an organization. In 1926, Graham Wallas wrote about the process of creative thinking and breaks this down into 4 stages, including preparation, incubation, illumination, and verification. Although Wallas has broken down creativity into these 4 stages, there are many factors involved when we're working creatively, and it's important to recognize that one size does not fit all. And I can assure you that as a 6'2" woman, one size does not fit all. And it's okay to go with what works best for you and your organization's needs. The key to creativity is being adaptable and open to what's possible. Like smiling, creativity is contagious. When people are being creative, they're often lost in the moment, caught up in the flow, and forget they're working because they're having fun. Being creative makes people happy, which in turn influences health and the overall attitudes of employees and organizational culture of community. And folks, happy employees means healthy employees. And to quote Pixar's Brad Bird, the director of Ratatouille and The Incredibles, the most significant impact on a movie's budget, but it's never in the budget, is employee morale. If you have low morale, for every dollar you spend, you'll get about 25 cents of value. If you have high morale, for every dollar you spend, you'll get about $3 of value. Folks, companies, libraries, everyone should be paying more attention to morale. And let's talk a little bit about turning outward, which is about getting into the flow of your users, allowing user needs to inform and influence one's priorities. Visit community spaces. Don't expect or assume that your users will come to you. Learn about your community needs. Find out, what do they care about? What makes them tick? I think many organizations assume that they know what their patrons needs, but sometimes it's better to let the community lead the vision. Collaborate, work together as one, find common goals, figure out how to help and support each other. This is crucial when staffing and budgets are dwindling. But also from my experience, when partners are involved, it's easier to get buy-in for ideas, and there's better attendance at events and higher uses of services. In the article, Innovating and Creating with Empathy, Terry Dunkowski discusses the 3 C's: creativity, compassion, and community. Dunkowski believes that creativity is not about what we create, but it's about how we create. Working creatively is reliant on safe spaces. When brainstorming and thinking laterally, anything goes, and judgment should not be part of this process. Working creatively is about learning and thinking together, which is reliant on empathy, understanding, and everyone being heard. This includes thinking critically, drawing conclusions, as well as applying, creating, and sharing knowledge. One must tap into territories which are foreign to many, such as advocacy, politicking, collaboration, communicating with people unlike oneself, selling ideas, taking risks, being tolerant, leading, being flexible, marketing, and practicing self-efficacy. Working creatively can be freeing, and it's exciting, in particular to those that are new to this work. However, it's important to keep an open mind, to play nice, and to not get lost in assumptions. Be vigilant in getting to know your audience, your colleagues, and your communities. Don't assume that you know where a colleague or a community is coming from until you've truly investigated the needs and wants and concerns of all the parties involved. But most important, always make sure to share the air. And to quote the company IDEO, none of us is smarter than all of us. Problems are best served when they can be seen from multiple angles, which relies on diverse viewpoints being present at the table. Academic and public libraries, as well as higher education, can use creativity and play to embrace multidisciplinary learning, which can be a dynamic way to engage in the classroom through programming or services. Libraries in the classroom are spaces where patrons come to learn, make, and discover. And active learning is one of the ways to hone creative thinking, problem solving, and team building skills, which are crucial to scholarly research, as well as lifelong learning. Also, these types of learning experiences can make less popular topics like visual literacy, finding images, or learning about copyright fun. One of the greatest misconceptions about creativity is that it can only happen in a prescribed space, including technology, fancy furniture, or fresh paint, which simply isn't true. Working creatively doesn't have a look. It's about the learning and engagement happening in any given space. Being, thinking, and working creatively can happen anywhere. In the shower, in the car, in a hairstyle, in your clothing, on public transportation, on your way to work, walking the dog, listening to music, over a tasty meal, over a not so tasty meal, reading a book, at a museum, at a coffee shop. The list is truly infinite. Creative spaces need to be flexible and adaptable. The rest will happen. Creativity and innovation work best when there's a balance between experimentation and evaluation. Organizations and people often associate creativity with a particular function, such as art, design, or marketing. However, creativity and innovation are the key to the everyday fabric of society. Creativity draws on feelings, existing ideas, playfulness, as well as knowledge of practical skills. Creativity is at the heart of both art and science. Both fields require an understanding of manipulating materials to produce an outcome. Honing ideas and materials is a form of expression. The only real difference between an artist and a scientist is that outcome. I recently had an opportunity to experience the connections between visual artists and the sciences firsthand. In the summer of 2019, Dr. Vadim Levin spoke at the New Brunswick Library's faculty meeting about the Rutgers Aresti Research Center's annual spring poster session. And this includes 300 undergraduate research posters. Dr. Levin mentioned that the libraries help the students with information literacy, but he was surprised when I asked, well, what kind of visual literacy training are these students receiving? Revealing, obviously, an opportunity for both the libraries and the Aresti Center. Visual literacy is the ability to make meaning from information presented in the form of image, which extends the meaning of literacy, which commonly signifies interpretation of written or printed text. Although visual literacy is nothing new, many people are unfamiliar with this concept and the skills it requires. In my discussions with Dr. Levin, who's the Aresti Center's director, I learned most of the students participating in the Aresti program are competitive undergraduate honors students in the sciences. Again, competitive undergraduate honor students in the sciences, 300 of them. Most of them will move on to graduate studies. And this is where they will need to clearly articulate with both written and visual forms. And this will be essential to their success. In one workshop, I walked the Aresti students through a scenario which I used to explain how to move from a topic sentence to a paper in 7 steps. First, I asked the students to create a 6-word sentence that describes their thesis statement. Second, I asked them to draw an image that represents their 6-word sentence. In some cases, we put the images on buttons. Third, the students create a 140-character tweet about their thesis. And fourth, they transition this into a 60-second elevator speech they might share with a grandparent or a younger sibling or someone who's not an expert on their topic. Fifth, I asked the students to start thinking about what a poster might look like, and we begin to discuss the balance of image versus text. In the 6th step, students begin to think about expanding their ideas in a PowerPoint presentation. And lastly, we discuss moving from PowerPoint to the final project, which is often a paper. And although we visualize some of this scenario, I regularly note creativity takes time. And again, we can't assume that one size fits all. Like scholarly research, it's important to know one's audience. As I told the students, don't present a loaf of bread to a group of judges who are gluten-free. unless there's a reason. But also I explained to the students, don't be afraid to get creative and step outside the box, because sometimes it's the button or the zine giveaway that keeps your audience engaged beyond that day of the 300-person poster session. Now let's keep in mind, there's no such thing as failure. We learn from all our experiences and they help guide in what comes next. With every project, event, service, really anything you're working on, ask questions, think about the outcomes. What did you learn? What would you do different next time? But also, in the words of the inventor, Thomas Edison, I have not failed 10,000 times. I have not failed once. I have succeeded in proving that those 10,000 ideas will not work. Now, let's talk a little bit about assessing creativity, which can be really hard. One important aspect of creativity and assessment is thinking in terms of impact, as opposed to trying to determine if something is successful or not. And I want to say that one more time. We need to think in terms of impact. It's not about is something successful or not. It's about how did it impact the libraries. You need to have goals, indicators that will help one reach said goal. And note that sometimes you'll have multiple goals, such as short and long-term goals. In the art library and at the Rutgers University Libraries in New Brunswick, we look at assessment for engagement and creativity and events in a variety of ways. We have surveys, we count number of patrons, supplies used, reference questions asked, etc. We monitor social media and local media for comments, likes, or shares about our events. If there's extra time and help, someone captures the comments overheard, questions asked, and the interesting engagement or connections made along by other patrons. And this is really key, particularly in the art library, because we're interdisciplinary. And there's nothing better when you realize two students from different disciplines can come together and discuss their research and the different lenses and how they're looking at it. At every event in the art library, we make sure we document with digital image and video, which can be tricky depending on your organization's video and photography policies. And sometimes we can only use the images to analyze ourselves. We have an assessment form, which we fill out after each event, which really serves as a mini debriefing and allows for space to write about what worked, what didn't, and what was the impact. I also create a one-page report and I send it out usually to the RUL listserv, including information about the impact, as well as a public thank you to all the volunteers. And of course, we always have a comment box with pen and paper. A diverse range of assessment can provide rich content and images that make for dynamic and interesting ways to show how libraries engage with their patrons. It's capturing the stories from these events, the interaction with library staff, and comments overheard are what really help us as organizations tell our story. When working on tasks or ideas, there's multiple pieces of the pie, and I'm always thinking about the process. It's important and it needs to be kept track of. Personally, I use a creativity model like what you see on this slide. This model involves refining problems, questioning, analyzing, generating ideas, recognizing knowledge that can both help and hinder, identifying and surmounting obstacles. In truth, the creativity workshop, the worksheet, is a creativity exercise within itself. But let's face it, at some point we need to stop talking about what creativity is and begin looking at how can we apply it. The Rutgers University Art Library exhibition spaces are popular at the art library. We have many audiences and our exhibits are open to all. We host wall exhibits, case exhibits, pop-up exhibits, as well as digital and audio exhibits. Basically, we have a committee, and I always say we'll entertain anything that does not damage or burn down the library. We do have a small committee of library folks who approve exhibits, and everything else is done in-house. There are a variety of goals, which our exhibits can include learning about the library's collection or learning about a topic specific. We even have a permanent exhibit we rotate in should we have a month with no artists scheduled. Many exhibitors have learned more about installing an exhibit from creation to consumption, including installation, marketing, and reception planning. And these are lifelong learning skills and ideas that can be used in many facets of life. We've worked with over 62 organizations, both local to the university, the city of New Brunswick, New Jersey, where we're located, as well as organizations throughout the state and beyond. And because this space is so low cost, and myself or the reference assistant do most of the work, I haven't really had to get too much buy-in. but I also regularly create reports and show the impact that keeps these spaces running. But we keep it simple because it's a homegrown teaching space. And for some exhibitors, this is the first time showing their work. I get a lot of hugs from parents that really don't understand why their child wants to be an artist. And then I can look at them and smile and say, hey, it worked out okay for me. Lastly, because of these spaces, I've truly formed deeper connections to the departments with whom I liaise. These spaces have helped the art library form new connections within departments on campus that might not find their way to a specialized library like an art library. But most important, these spaces have elevated the importance of scholarly research being created in the arts on the Rutgers campuses and beyond our local community. We also host experiences with living artists. And again, we're state-funded universities, so most of our events are open to the public. We don't always have learning goals specific, but we try to tie these experiences back to the mission of the library or one of our collections or services. And because many of these events are pop-up, they more or less are partnerships that build goodwill. We've had a lot of interesting partners in program, but it's fairly new, so we're always exploring. We were looking at creating an outdoor garden film series, and then the pandemic hit. So we're in a discussion of how to adapt this series. Above, you'll see some former events that we've hosted. Orange Music, who is a duo of experimental and performance poets from Argentina. The event had been planned for an alternate location and canceled at the last minute. The art library was able to be flexible and accommodate the music professor who invited them to campus. The event brought 30 new people to the art library, and we heard incredibly positive comments from the visual arts department for supporting performance artists. And for those that don't know, the Fluxus movement was actually started, and Rutgers New Brunswick is an enormous key player in that role. And Fluxus is something that is very important to who we are. So it is important that we continue to support our performance artists. Peter and Donna Thomas are book artists from California, and they're traveling bookmobile. We've hosted Peter and Donna 2 or 3 times now, and we've been able to involve the art department, the English department, and so many other participants. We always make sure we have an activity plan for them, such as touring a special collection or attending a talk of sorts. Although they're here to share with us, we also want to share our awesome with them. And lastly, we have Hub City Opera, and this is a fairly new organization in New Brunswick, New Jersey. And a lot in here at the art library, it really involves a lot of students, faculty, and staff from a variety of our Rutgers communities. And although this event was not publicized as a fundraiser, the opera was able to share their message with a wider audience and in turn did receive further fiscal support. Next, we'll talk a little bit about embedded librarianship. And this is nothing new. It can happen in many ways. For me personally, I spend 6 hours a week hosting office hours, primarily in the lobbies of the departments in which I serve. Now I hold virtual reference hours, or sometimes students and faculty catch up with me when I'm walking one of my dogs on the Cook Douglas campus. The idea is to be present in the space to encourage students, faculty, and staff to ask questions and learn more about the libraries. But again, I'm getting in the flow of my users. I'm learning about what they are up to. And they remember the libraries because they regularly see me. I always have library materials. It's kind of an impromptu show and tell. I have information about services. I have buttons. I often have candy. Every semester, I work with the department administrators to talk about the same day each week. I want some consistency. And really, this started as an experiment. And the first year I did it, my reference questions and engagement doubled. And they continue to see a huge influx every year. I'm always doing more teaching. I'm always engaging more with my patrons, more events, and everyone knows who I am. And that's important because we want the libraries to be at the forefront in our patrons' spaces. And I'm always working on new ideas to spice up my presence in the lobbies, and the latest have been the cutout Megans. As you can see here on the far left, which live in the departments I serve, I have 3 new exciting cutouts, which will be here next week. And again, will be installed in these spaces that I'm not able to physically be present in, unfortunately, due to the COVID pandemic. In 2014, I encountered Lego Series Play at the I2C2 Innovation, Inspiration, and Creativity Conference in the Manchester, UK. Post the conference, I came back home. I got my hands on a few hundred pounds of free Lego and began running workshops with Rutgers University Libraries faculty and staff. After running these workshops and learning more about how to handle a teaching event that uses toys as a medium and encourages loud voices, and at moments resembles total chaos. I began thinking about what would happen if a pile of Lego was left in the middle of the art library. And in August 2014, the art library Lego playing station was installed. The playing station has little to no cost other than time, so it didn't need to get much buy-in. And I honestly ignored the criticism and the naysayers, which wasn't easy to do because I was untenured at the time. However, this project started small and it grew to a point when I needed to ask for funding, it was there. Since implementing this makerspace, we have had 3,200 pictures of Lego creations at the station. And the cost of the makerspace and 35 events we've hosted has been less than $100 total, excluding the cost of labor. As a result of this makerspace, the art library has seen an increase in visits to the library from the community members, but also Lego has been used in multiple course collaborations to introduce students to Rutgers University libraries, as well as refine critical thinking, problem solving, and 3D building skills. Just before the pandemic, the entire faculty of the Spanish and Portuguese department held their yearly faculty retreat at the art library, and I facilitated the entire group and walked them through a Lego workshop. After that workshop, I was contacted by 5 members of that faculty to talk about how more to have these engaging and dynamic experiences within their courses. And that's pretty powerful because folks, I'm here to tell you, I'm the art librarian who has a background in French. So there were moments that these people were speaking in a language I couldn't understand, but it didn't matter because we were playing and engaging in ways that we were just communicating for who we were and what we were in the moment. In one example, Lego was used as a tool for collecting data by the libraries to learn more about our transfer students. 35 students from the Students in Transition program run by the Office of Academic Services attended one of 3 workshops at the art library in which participants were asked to get into groups and build models of the best library ever, and then they shared their creations with their peers. From this workshop, the libraries learned more about what students expect or would like to see happen in the libraries. As well, many participants left the art library smiling, and they said that they'd never been to the art library before, and it seemed like a great place to study. They commented, I met new friends, which was great because again, these are transition students. They're new to campus. I liked having fun and learning with toys. And one student said if they needed help, they were going to contact a librarian. And if that wasn't a successful or impactful use of Lego, I don't know what was. Whoops, sorry, I've lost my mouse. Oh, there we go. All right, the RUL button making initiative started small and has become a force to be reckoned with, in part because everyone loves making buttons, whether it be branded for the libraries, highlighting a collection, or a personal button commemorating the end of a project. We can, and we will, make a button for everything. I wasn't exactly sure what we would do when we purchased the machine, but I expected good things. And I got lucky. Early in the process, I was approached by Tara Maharjan, and she wanted to make a button for one of her family members. And after that meeting, that's when the magic really started happening. We started hosting events. It was a collaboration between the art library and special collections. We started making buttons with patrons, and now we use the machines years later to teach about copyright, visual literacy, information literacy, and so much more. We've highlighted too many collections and services to mention, and in particular, it's been an incredible way for special collections and university archives to get out of the basement and into the flow of our users. We now have a button making listserv with over 160 names on it. We've partnered with over 120 organizations across our campuses, and we've hosted events and made over 22,000 buttons. Listen, the button making initiative isn't a lot of time, it's not a lot of money, but seriously, the cost of buttons is buying goodwill, which is intangible, but it's truly worth its weight in gold. This project grew organically, and because it doesn't involve a lot of administrative approval, we've been able to easily adapt, be proactive, and take agency. And folks, button making isn't high risk, but boy, is it high impact. In the past 2 years, we've been exploring the world of zines throughout the Rutgers University libraries. And as an artist myself, I'm crazy for making zines, but also zines make sense for the RULNB because we house zines in the women's artist collections, as well as our popular culture collections. Zine projects can happen in a variety of ways. hosting a zine making event in which you invite students or patrons to create their own zines with DIY crafting materials, which are often crowdsourced from library faculty and staff. Zines can be used to teach visual literacy and storytelling for individual classes. During COVID, I had about 7 or 8 faculty approach me about incorporating zines into their courses. They wanted to provide their students alternative ways other than papers or annotated bibliographies. And the zine is scholarly and fun. And we ended up creating an incredible rubric. And really, these were incredibly fruitful projects. And it wasn't so stressful. And I think that that was really important for students. And it gave them a new way to express themselves. But also, zines can be used as a tool for publicity. In 2019, I created the Art Library zine as a response to the very corporate-looking brochures that library communications departments often create. And these are really beautiful brochures. They're slick, the printing is exquisite, but they're expensive. And at the end of every semester, I throw almost all of them away in the art library recycling bin. After running some focus groups with the art and design students and individuals that used the art library, it was clear that the zine was favored, mostly because it was full of visuals and little text, but also because it was unique, small, it was targeted. It was something that these students understood, and they reported that they could put it in their pocket, and many asked to take one for a friend. And lastly, I've been using the zine as a making break during bibliographic courses because students like spending 3 minutes making something, and it's similar to the buttons. Students are interested in the idea of a little book and creating and having their voice heard on an 8.5 by 11-inch piece of paper. In the image above, you'll see some shots from a recent zine workshop I co-hosted in Carnegie Mellon in Doha, Qatar, as well as a few examples of zines made for or about the art library. And one of our most recent projects was the Urban Sketching Project, which took place in the fall of 2020, and we'll be doing this again in November. The project looked more closely at the application of drawing skills and how to apply observational thinking and visual literacy into our everyday lives. As I started planning and writing about the project, I really started thinking about, well, what's the difference between sketching and drawing? Drawings are made with pencil, pen, or crayon, and sketching is about capturing your surroundings and drawing what you see. A sketch is a rough or unfinished drawing, a painting, or something that's made to inform a more finished project. For me, one of the most interesting aspects of urban sketching is the similarities to scholarly research. Both activities rely on observation, analysis, storytelling, and advancing the work within one's discipline. Very few individuals I know beyond my work as an academic librarian would claim to be experts in scholarly research, and this is the same for artists when sketching. Both exercise problem-solving skills, but in different ways. Urban sketching shows how we understand facts and the world around us, allowing our brains to relax and let our hands do the work. But also, like writing a research paper, an urban sketch doesn't have to be a masterpiece or a published manuscript. It's a story about a moment in time based around a specifically curated set of facts, which will potentially turn into something more. And there are many benefits to drawing, including a brain break, honing one's observation skills, and for some, an opportunity to try something new. Keeping a sketchbook can be a place to keep ideas and somewhere you can go when you're having a slow day. And the last project I'll talk about today, and perhaps our most recent project, is RU Creative. And this got started because of the cancellation of Lego Camp, a yearly event hosted in the art library, which I facilitate a week's worth of Lego-related activities as part of the Zimmerly Art Museum summer camp. And this is the wildest part. It's for kids ages 7 to 12. So you can guess it's pretty wild, but most of the curriculum I've created focuses on creativity, play, self-expression, and the importance of libraries. And why this is so powerful? Most of these children will likely be Rutgers students one day, and most of them are children of very important high administrators in the campuses. So you'd be amazed how much administrators will pay attention to you when you're educating their children. Now, because the art library was closed for 18 months, we were not able to host the camp this year, but I wanted to create a virtual experience in which campers would receive a bag of supplies that could be used as is, but also included links to additional resources and virtual materials that were created by myself and Tara Maharjan, who I like to refer to as my work partner in creative crime. I won't talk about this project much because the assessment is in the initial stages. It just happened. But I want to note the RU Create is not just for kids. We wanted this experience to be something that we could also use with adults and members of the RU community. Basically, it's a virtual space to keep track of what the libraries are up to on a creativity and making front. In the images on this slide, you'll see the resource guide includes videos, informations about button making, coloring, cootie catchers, journal making, printing, games, urban sketching, scenes, and soon we'll have a Create Canva page coming, as Judith Ward and the Books We Read program works a lot with design and students getting to think about how they can express their own ideas. But now we've talked about creativity. We've looked at some examples. What does it all mean? Why should we or organizations engage in creativity? And truly, creativity strengthens the ties with local communities and surrounding neighborhoods, which builds goodwill for the libraries. Working creatively encourages engagement, which helps form partnerships, as well as encourages cross-disciplinary collaboration. And this brings new users into our libraries. And you can't learn from a book, which you can learn from a creative, ephemeral, physical, or virtual experience with a librarian or a living artist. Creative, engaging events can provide hands-on learning experiences which hone critical thinking and problem-solving skills. And these are tools that are essential when performing scholarly research. And folks, if anything, I can promise you, you don't need a lot of money to be creative. Be resourceful, get to know your community, your local media sources, and they can help with publicity. But lastly, being creative and turning outward can help libraries and organizations tell their stories in interesting ways, which shows that impact within our communities, as well as shows the value of how libraries are a crucial component to culture and learning. Finally, I'd like to encourage you all to think about creativity, play, and learning, and how to incorporate these ideas into your own work and everyday lives. Although it might initially bring you some anxiety or maybe even feel awkward or strange, it's important to get outside of your comfort zone at work and learn what might be possible. And I want to leave you with one last story involving play in academic libraries, which I experienced in 2015 when I took what might be similar to a tour of libraries or following a band. I hopped in a car with 100 pounds of Legos, 2 dogs, and my significant other, and we facilitated 21 workshops at state schools throughout mostly the Midwest and the East Coast. As one of the workshop participants entered the room, it was clear there were a few individuals that they simply weren't interested. One participant made it very clear they had work to do. I knew ahead of time that this workshop would be one of the top administrators, all of the top administrators from the organization, and what many academic libraries and governments call cabinet. Overall, the workshop ran smooth, everyone behaved, and all went as planned. However, after everything ended and the participants were departing, that naysayer came up to me and noted prior to the experience, they were certain that this Lego workshop was not for them. And truly, the individual expressed they had so much work to do. Yet, this gentleman gave me a giant hug, thanked me, and told me how wrong he was. He went on to talk about how much fun he'd had, how much he'd learned about himself, his colleagues. But most important, he noted that his group was able to solve problems with fresh eyes because they were playing. And in less than 90 minutes, they were able to address difficult issues that had been haunting the organization for years. I left that workshop that day with a little bit of extra pep in my step, knowing that on that day, an administrator listened and was able to step outside of his comfort zone and give something new a try. Thank you all for your time and attention today. If you'd like to learn more about creativity in my work, you can do so in Advancing a Culture of Creativity in Libraries, Programming, Engagement. And I'm happy to say that we do have this book at the Rutgers University Libraries. Whoops, and if you have any questions, feel free to ask now, raise your hand, type a question in the chat, and I will now stop recording and sharing. Maybe.